we're going to get straight on with the online safety bill. And this was being discussed in the House of Lords yesterday. As you can see, there were actually a few people turned up for that. So it was being debated yesterday, and the pressure on the government over online safety continues to build. And I think this is good news. But the fundamental issue that I've raised in the past still stands, and that is that the bill as it's currently drafted relies on extremely key but unknown details about which are only going to become clear after secondary legislation has been published at some point in the future. So this bill will go through with really a lot of its functionality not understood. And of course, Ofcom hasn't written the codes of practice, which will be enabled by this bill as well. So in the Lords yesterday, they were talking about exemptions on certain services from regulation under the Act. So here is Lord Allan of Hallam. He was saying there's a material risk that without further amendment or clarification, then Wikipedia and other similar services may feel they can no longer operate in the United Kingdom. So they're looking for exemptions for services which are considered to be non-commercial, but in the public interest. This was Lord Moylan. So we just heard from a Liberal Democrat. This is Lord Moylan, the Tory peer. The fact that the government have not come forward with any suggestions or amendments to address this at all is truly remarkable. So the problems still exist with the online safety bill with respect to freedom of speech and the regulatory burden on various platforms. But let's just keep in mind that the latest argument here is over encryption and privacy. So here is an open letter that's been published 2 days ago. I think this was Wednesday. Open letter from security and privacy researchers in relation to the online safety bill. And they're saying in this letter, we wish to highlight alarming misunderstandings and misconceptions around the online safety bill and its interaction with the privacy and security technologies that our daily online interactions and communication rely on. And they're basically saying that the government is, when in the drafting of this bill, is from a technological perspective illiterate. And therefore, the bill is going to have a chilling effect on the way we do our daily business online. And of course, this is something we've been warning about at the UK column for quite a long time. So we just put that back on screen again. Let's just have a look at the list of signatories. They're all various professors and PhDs from various universities right across the country, and in fact, not only in the United Kingdom. But in the meantime, here is Conservative Home and Siobhán Baillie, MP. The online safety bill lets enforce verification online and so give people more power, information and control. And so the moves to push for a sort of mandatory digital ID continue. This is what she said in her article in Conservative Home. Yet, as I exposed in my campaign about anonymous abuse, the elephant in the room is fake and anonymous accounts. Research from Clean Up the Internet found the ability to easily create anonymous, fake and deceptive social media accounts is a common enabler of pretty much every form of fraud perpetrated online. So the push for digital ID and verification of identity continues. But as we say, the issue of being able to encrypt your communications online is very much the main front in the battle of online safety at the moment. Well, Meredith Whittaker from Signal was interviewed on Channel 4 News yesterday. Let's just have a listen quickly to what she had to say.
There is no way to create a backdoor that only the good guys can walk through. And what's being proposed here in the context of end-to-end encryption is a backdoor. And we know from decades of history, from decades of serious research, that there's no such thing as a safe backdoor. If the British police can get in, hackers can get in. If the British police can get in, hostile nations can get in. If the British police can get in, Putin can get in, the Iranian government can get in, and others wanting to do harm can get in. So it's really important that we maintain the security and integrity of these systems.
So we have another clip to follow, but Patrick, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that because, I mean, she absolutely has a point.
She does have a great point there. I can do without the hyperbole about the Putin and the Iranians wanting to do harm. How exactly were they going to do harm to the British public? But put that aside. She's talking about, things akin to, having government-approved spyware on your devices so that the government can have a backdoor. should the companies not want to play ball with the government on this, they might still be compelled to use some kind of a third-party tool or something like that. I don't know if you've heard anything along those lines.
Well, we certainly have, and we'll come on to that in 1 second. But of course, the person that was sitting beside her in that little interview was Damien Collins, MP, former chair of the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, and he has been a rabid proponent of this online harms legislation to shut down everything, shut down freedom of speech, shut down a whole lot of behaviour online. So let's just have a listen to how he came back at Meredith Whittaker and then how she retorted against him. Let's have a look at this.
I agree with Meredith on that point. I mean, I don't think it would be safe to say there's a safe backdoor, because once you create it, other people will find it as well. That's why we're not going to ask companies to break encryption. What the regulator would do, I would imagine with a company like Signal, is when the regulator, Ofcom, is creating the codes of practice, they might say to Signal, well, what sort of data do you gather? And if Signal says, well, we don't gather data about people's messages, we can't possibly look at this. The regulator won't say you need to break encryption. It'll say that's fine, but you do have policies, let's say, on legal and appropriate use. How do you enforce those? What do you do?
None of that is specified in the bill, and this is our concern, because we hear things that are sensible like that from people like you, and then we look at the bill, and what is specified is a regime that would give Ofcom the power to demand that everyone in the UK download spyware that checks their messages before they're sent against a database of what is permissible to say and send and what is not permissible. And that is a precedent that authoritarian regimes are looking to the UK to set, to point to a liberal democracy that was the first to expand surveillance in the terms of the UN Human Rights Commissioner. This is unprecedented paradigm-shifting surveillance, and paradigm-shifting not in the good way.
So again, Patrick, it's hard to be able to argue with that point of view.
Yeah, so the problem we have with this is what happened in the U.S. is the government could say, "Oh, we're not, sharing this with anybody. It's strictly for, the FBI or something like that." And what you have is then governments trading this information and data between government agencies, totally out of public view, and also even so, a government's purchasing data that's been scraped by private companies for various reasons, could be for advertising or something like that, and then taking that data from third parties. So this is happening. It's just completely rife. So what she's talking about there is particularly egregious, and that's kind of some mandatory, government spyware on your device on the assumption that you might cause a crime. So there's the whole concept of probable cause is completely out the window.
Yes.
This is a fundamental alteration of our rights, going right back to the Magna Carta.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Let's just look at this, because we mentioned this a week or so ago, I think, because the Senate in France had agreed that police should be allowed to remotely activate phone cameras and microphones and spy on people. But now it has actually gone through the entire process, and this bill has become law. So let's just bring a quote on screen. During the debate on Wednesday, the members of Parliament in the camp of Emmanuel Macron inserted an amendment limiting the use of remote spying to, quote, when justified by the nature and seriousness of the crime and for strictly proportional duration. And they also noted that a judge must approve any use of the provision while the total duration of the surveillance cannot exceed 6 months. Nonetheless, this is a very dangerous and slippery slope. In the meantime, in the United States, this is an interesting story. In AP, judge limits Biden administration in working with social media companies. So a judge on Tuesday prohibited several federal agencies and officials of the Biden administration from working with social media companies over protected speech. And this is a decision that's called a blow to censorship by one of the Republican officials whose lawsuit brought the ruling, says Associated Press. So this is a pretty good development on that side as well. The pushback continues. But I just wanted to bring this back on screen for a third time, so I do apologize. But this was the document that I put out on Monday, which I mistakenly put out on Monday because it turned out to be fake, saying that Emmanuel Macron was in fact restricting the use of internet for certain areas where there were trouble on the streets. And of course, that document proved to be a fake document. Nonetheless, French media showing that, in fact, he has refused to rule out this provision in the future. So I just wanted to highlight that. So let's bring it on screen, this quick quote here. If we do a translation: in the event of a crisis, Emmanuel Macron does not rule out cutting social networks. He said, we need to have a reflection on social networks, on the prohibitions that we must put in place. And when things get carried away, we may have to put ourselves in the position to regulate the internet or cut it off, is basically what he's saying there. So in the meantime, Patrick, what's going on with Julian Assange?
Urged a little over a week ago here, Declassified UK, Matt Kennard, a very good report. And there seems to be some evidence here of something that we all suspected at the time, but we didn't quite have the exact receipts for it. Headline reads, Crown Prosecution Services has destroyed all records of Keir Starmer's 4 trips to Washington here. So this is regarding the U.S. records, which show Starmer met with Attorney General Eric Holder and a host of other American and British national security officials in Washington in 2011, when he was in charge of Julian Assange's proposed extradition to Sweden for the sort of fitted up sex case that ended up collapsing 3 times because there was no provenance to it. But nonetheless, so this is interesting. And here are the real points here. We'll bring these bullet points up one by one. And Starmer was in Washington 3 times while in charge of Assange's proposed extradition to Sweden. So clearly taking instructions from the U.S. government there, or some sort of collusion, perhaps. Starmer led a 5-person British delegation that met with Holder for 45 minutes in Washington on November of 2011. And furthermore, the delegation included the UK liaison prosecutor to the U.S. who dealt with extradition. So think about this for a minute. There was this denial that there was a plan to extradite. And this is why Julian Assange took refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, because he suspected that that was the case. This was all written off and, dismissed as a conspiracy theory at the time. Well, we have the receipts here. This is absolutely what was in the works. So the meeting also attended by the head of the DOJ's National Security Division. That's not trivial. And the CPS refuses to clarify to Declassified UK if destruction of the Washington documents is a routine procedure. And the reason they were destroyed, quite clearly, is because they prove that there was a sort of advanced planning, advanced coordination, a conspiracy, if you will, to put Julian Assange either on indefinite arbitrary detention, which the case, according to the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, but not only that, but prepare the ground for extradition, whereby the British or the Swedes, turns out to be the British, would keep him on ice for as long as necessary that the United States might need to bring him back. Now, Eric Holder's DOJ at the time under Obama didn't go for the superseding indictments and to go all out in terms of indictments to bring Assange to the U.S. at the time, but the Trump administration did. And what that tells us is that there was probably, this case had been prepared even in advance of Donald Trump. So they just hadn't pulled the trigger yet. So this is interesting. And, one wonders, Mike, whether Keir Starmer was rewarded for this and other things, perhaps, as he sort of moved up in the world very soon after this.
Yeah, indeed.